One of Pokemon's greatest disappointments was the inability to transfer Generation 2 Pokemon to Generation 3. In Generation 4, the developers made sure not to repeat this failure, and as such made it possible to transfer your GBA Pokemon to your DS. While this was a relief to all the dedicated Pokemon collectors out there, the place where you transferred these cross-generation Pokemon, known as the PAL Park, was a place known for being tedious, poorly thought out, and filled with arbitrary restrictions. You probably haven't visited PAL Park in a while, but today we're gonna take a trip back to this mismanaged excuse of a park and examine why we hated transferring Pokemon from Generation 3 to Generation 4. PAL Park is available in Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, Heart Gold, and Soul Silver. In all of these games, it is accessed in the post-game. While I sort of understand putting it in the post-game, another part of me wants to argue against the idea of restricting players from using Gen 3 caught Pokemon in a standard Gen 4 playthrough. Now, clearly this is trying to prevent a player from simply transferring in their high-leveled starter or a legendary or something, but they could just as easily do that with one of their other Gen 4 games as well. Pokemon already has the badge obedience system to discourage players from using high-leveled Pokemon from other games anyway. So would it really be the end of the world if I went through Platinum with Torchic just because I so choose to? PAL Park works using one of those DS's that has a Game Boy Advance slot. Because of this, I always wanted to keep a DS Lite on hand even when I upgraded to DSi and 3DS later on. It's kinda cool how the DS game was actually able to communicate with the GBA game. I'm not sure if there are any other games on the system that did something similar. Let me know in the comments if there are. So once you get to the menu, it'll say transfer Pokemon from X game. Then you get to go look at the boxes of the Gen 3 game. Now remember, you can only transfer from the boxes, not from your team. So make sure the Pokemon you want to transfer isn't still on the team back in that Gen 3 game, lest you have to turn off your DS and start all over. Also, you can't transfer any Pokemon that know HM moves. This restriction can be really annoying. The amount of times I've had to restart and go back into the Gen 3 game to go to the move deleter just because it happened to know an HM was too much. And did it really have to restrict every HM? Why not just surf and fly? Those are the only two HMs that could actually leave you stranded anywhere anyway. There's no instance where suddenly losing Cut, Rock Smash, or Flash of all things is gonna soft lock you. Something interesting about PAL Park is that you are actually allowed to transfer held items. I believe this is the only time that you can transfer items from one generation to another, as even Gen 5 doesn't allow items from Gen 4. You can only transfer 6 Pokemon at a time, per day. You heard me right, per day. Pretty annoying if you ask me. This is still a less tedious process than if you want to individually trade your Pokemon to other Gen 4 games, but I just never understood Pokemon's reluctance to allow you to just bring over your Pokemon quickly. If I had to guess, I think they possibly did this 6 per day restriction because they were concerned some kids would just empty out their Gen 3 games immediately, and since there was no transferring back, would find themselves with an unplayable Gen 3 game. However, if a player is young enough to make that mistake, they most likely have fewer than 6 Pokemon holding up their team in the first place, and those Pokemon will probably be the first ones they transfer. So in practice, this restriction only serves to punish those who want to catch them all. They did remove the once per day rule in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, so it seems they eventually came to agree with me that it was a bad idea. But still, for those of us that played the series before Heart Gold and Soul Silver released, we had a long process of getting everyone transferred over. Alright, so you've selected your 6 Pokemon from your Gen 3 game, now they're in your Gen 4 game, right? Right? You're not getting your Pokemon that easy. You need to play the catching show first. Well, a catching show? That sounds kind of fun. It is not. Here's how the catching show works. After you transfer your Pokemon, you get going into the PAL Park. Now, PAL Park has 5 sections: the regular grass, the forest, the ocean, the mountains, and the lake. Every Pokemon is set to spawn in one of these 5 kinds of biomes. You might want to have a guide ready because you could just wander in the grass forever if the Pokemon you're looking for isn't actually there. Also, don't forget to bring a Pokemon with Surf. Can't tell you how many times I caught like 4 of my catching show Pokemon, realized one of them was in the ocean or lake, realized I didn't bring a Pokemon with Surf, and had to start all over. Ironic, when transferring Pokemon, you get punished for having Surf, and when getting the Pokemon, you get punished if you don't have Surf. Encountering the Pokemon could take a while if the Pokemon is a legendary, which, let's be real, that's like the main reason you're using Pal Park. It's to transfer over the legendaries you couldn't otherwise get in these Gen 4 games. So thanks for punishing us for using your game mechanic for the most significant thing that game mechanic can do. I think they toned down how long it took to encounter a legendary in Platinum as opposed to Diamond and Pearl, because I remember as a kid on my copy of Diamond just taking forever to find the legendaries. But when I tried it just now in Platinum, it wasn't as bad. Perhaps I was just less patient back then. So, when you encounter your Pokemon, you must battle them. Wow, that's kinda cool. You have to fight your old Pokemon with your new Pokemon? No. Why would they do something that wasn't lame? You just catch them without fail in these golden Pokeballs, which are never used anywhere else in the series. It's kinda disappointing nothing can ever be caught in the area-exclusive Park Balls either. Like, they have such a cool design. I'm glad that the transferred Pokemon do retain their original Pokeball they were caught in, but I also would have loved to see an opportunity to put something in a Park Ball. Maybe we could have had the option? Like, if you transferred a Pokemon in something cool like a Luxury Ball or a Safari Ball, you might want to keep it as is. But if it were just a generic Pokeball, maybe you could choose to put it in the new Park Ball. The catching show also has a score. The score is based on how fast you caught all the Pokemon, how rare the Pokemon you caught were, and what types the Pokemon were, with more type variety granting more points. This is an incredibly lame scoring criteria. The game seems to be encouraging you to transfer your Pokemon in a certain way in order to rack up as much points as you can. And when you do transfer your Pokemon in that way, you are then challenged to map out your path through Pal Park to catch them as fast as possible. Wow, so fun. Searching a guide for where all these Pokemon will spawn and then hoping I find them quickly. Oh, and what's my prize if I get a really good score? A Qualot Berry. Great. Can never have too many Qualot berries. It just seemed like Pal Park was trying to be a place where you transferred your Pokemon and its own piece of side content. And it failed miserably at both of those things because it tried to be both of those things. Unfortunately, transferring your Pokemon is just not meant to be fun. It's a utilitarian task, necessary to the health and longevity of a game series like Pokemon. Instead of a Pal Park, it should have just been some big computer in the professor's lab that's like, hey, want to get some Pokemon from Hoenn and Kanto? Boring, yes, but that's kinda all it needed to be. I appreciate them trying to do something more interesting than that with the Pal Park, but honestly, I would rather just lose out on that immersion if it meant I didn't have to deal with all this nonsense. When Gen 5 rolled around, they made a slightly better minigame for its transferring mechanic, but it still had the flaw of being a tedious way to transfer over all the Pokemon you wanted in the new generation. By Gen 6, they finally got it, and with Pokemon Bank and eventually Pokemon Home, transferring Pokemon between generations became utilitarian as it should be. It also became a scam, a subscription service for storing virtual monsters that you got on games you paid for that could already be stored on those games you paid for, is complete nonsense. But beyond that shady business practice, the concept of transferring Pokemon has come a long, long way from the needless convolution of the Pal Park. I also cover movies and TV shows over on my other channel, Stories Are Meaningful. You should really check out my video on the Pokemon anime that breaks down why Ash wasn't the champion the first time around. If you like what I do and want to see me do more of it, consider becoming a channel member or supporting my Patreon, link in the description. Thank you so much for watching, see you next time.